Dear students, Namaskar. I hope that you all must be in sound health and must be excited for today's lesson. Children, today we are going to discuss Chapter 8 of Science of Class 10, How Do Organisms Reproduce? Before we start with the discussion of the chapter, let us revise what we already know. What is reproduction? The process through which human beings and other organisms produce new living beings is called reproduction. Name the two types of reproduction. The two types of reproduction are asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction. Name the male reproductive organs. A pair of testes, sperm ducts, and penis are male reproductive organs. Name female reproductive organs. Ovaries, oviducts, and uterus are female reproductive organs. Which is the method through which amoeba reproduces? And the method through which amoeba reproduces is binary fission. Now we shall see what we are going to learn today. Variation in organisms, modes of reproduction, sexual reproduction in plants, sexual reproduction in human beings. First of all, we will discuss variation in organisms. Organisms look similar because their body designs are similar. If body designs are to be similar, the blueprints for these designs should be similar. Thus, reproduction at its most basic level will involve making copies of the blueprints of body design. The chromosomes in the nucleus of a cell contain information for inheritance of features from parents to next generation in the form of DNA. The DNA in the cell nucleus is the information source for making proteins. If the information is changed, different proteins will be made. Different proteins will eventually lead to altered body designs. Therefore, a basic event in reproduction is the creation of a DNA copy. Cells use chemical reactions to build copies of their DNA. This creates two copies of the DNA in a reproducing cell, and they will need to be separated from each other. These two DNAs are of course similar, but are they likely to be absolutely identical? The answer to this question will depend on how accurately the copying reactions involved occur. No biochemical reaction is absolutely reliable. Therefore, it is only to be expected that the process of copying the DNA will have some variations each time. As a result, the DNA copies generated will be similar but may not be identical to the original. Some of these variations might be so drastic that the new DNA copy cannot work with the cellular apparatus it inherits. Such a newborn cell will simply die. On the other hand, there could still be many other variations in the DNA copies that would not lead to such a drastic outcome. Thus, the surviving cells are similar to but subtly different from each other. This inbuilt tendency for variation during reproduction is the basis for evolution. The importance of variation. Populations of organisms fill well-defined places or niches in the ecosystem using their ability to reproduce. The consistency of DNA copying during reproduction is important for the maintenance of body design features that allow the organism to use that particular niche. Reproduction is therefore linked to the stability of population of species. However, niches can change because of reasons beyond the control of the organisms. Temperatures on Earth can go up or down, water levels can vary. Thus, if there were a population of penguin living in temperate waters, and if the water temperature were to be increased by global warming, most of these penguins would die. But a few variants resistant to heat would survive and grow further. Variation is thus useful for the survival of species over time. Children, let us now know about modes of reproduction. Modes of reproduction used by single-celled organisms. Let us now examine how different organisms actually reproduce. The modes by which various organisms reproduce depend on the body design of the organisms. Our first mode of reproduction is fission. For unicellular organisms, cell division or fission leads to the creation of new individuals. Many different patterns of fission have been observed. Many bacteria and protozoa simply split into two equal halves during cell division. In organisms such as amoeba, the splitting of the two cells during division can take place in any plane. Next mode of reproduction is fragmentation. In multicellular organisms with relatively simple body organization, simple reproductive methods can still work. Spirogyra, for example, simply breaks up into smaller pieces upon maturation. These pieces or fragments grow into new individuals. Regeneration. Many fully differentiated organisms have the ability to give rise to new individual organisms from their body parts. That is, if the individual is somehow cut or broken up into many pieces, many of these pieces grow into separate individuals. For example, simple animals like hydra and planaria can be cut into any number of pieces and each piece grows into a complete organism. This is known as regeneration. Our next method of reproduction is budding. Organisms such as hydra use regenerative cells for reproduction in the process of budding. In hydra, a bud develops as an outgrowth due to repeated cell division at one specific site. These buds develop into tiny individuals and when fully mature, detach from the parent body and become new independent individuals. Our next mode of reproduction is vegetative propagation. There are many plants in which parts like the root, stem and leaves develop into new plants under appropriate conditions. Unlike in most animals, plants can indeed use such a mode for reproduction. Plants like sugarcane, roses or grapes are some examples. Now we will discuss about spore formation. Even in many simple multicellular organisms, specific reproductive parts can be identified. The thread-like structures that developed on the bread are the hyphae of the bread mold. They are not reproductive parts. The tiny blob on a stick structures are involved in reproduction. The blobs are sporangia, which contain cells or spores that can eventually develop into new bread mold individuals or rhizopus individuals. All the modes of reproduction that we have discussed so far allow new generations to be created from a single individual. This is known as asexual reproduction. What is sexual reproduction? The mode of reproduction that depend on the involvement of two individuals to create a new organism is called sexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction in flowering plants. The reproductive parts of angiosperms are located in the flower. Stamens and pistil are the reproductive parts of a flower which contain the germ cells. Stamen is the male reproductive part and it has two parts filament and anther. Pistil is present in the center of a flower and is the female reproductive part. It is made of three parts: stigma, style and ovary. Ovary contains ovules and anther produces pollen grains. The pollen needs to be transferred from the stamen to the stigma. This transfer of pollen from one flower to another is achieved by agents like wind, water and animals. If this transfer of pollen occurs in the same flower, it is referred to as self-pollination. On the other hand, if the pollen is transferred from one flower to another, it is known as cross-pollination. Bees also play an important role in pollination. After the pollen lands on a suitable stigma, it has to reach the female germ cells which are in the ovary. For this, a tube grows out of the pollen grain and travels through the style to reach the ovary. The male germ cell fuses with the ovule in the ovary, and this process is called fertilization and leads to the formation of zygote. After fertilization, the zygote divides several times to form an embryo within the ovule. Seed dispersal in plants. We know that plants do not move from one place to another. Have you ever thought how the seeds of the plant spread to faraway places and produce new plants? This is because seeds reach different places and this is called seed dispersal. Seed dispersal is carried by winds, water, insects and animals. When seed is sown in the soil, it germinates into a new plant. In some plants, fruits burst with sudden jerks and seeds are dispersed with force and scattered far from parent plant. And this dispersal helps the plant to prevent overcrowding, avoid competition for sunlight, water and minerals. Reproduction in human beings. The period of life when body undergoes changes leading to reproductive maturity is called adolescence. During adolescence, the appearance of the body changes. Some of these changes are common to both boys and girls. On the other hand, there are also changes taking place that are different between boys and girls. In girls, breast size begins to increase, the region below the waist becomes wider, girls begin to menstruate, the increase in height, the growth of hair in the underarm and pubic area. In boys, they begin to have new thick hair growth on the face, their voice begins to crack, increase in height, growth of hair in chest and pubic area occurs. During puberty, the secretion of sweat glands and sebaceous glands increase. Many young people get acne and pimples on the face at this time. Teenagers also undergo mental, intellectual and emotional maturity. Sexual reproduction in humans. There are male and female organisms in animals which have separate sexual organs which produce gametes. These gametes fuse together to form a zygote. This zygote develops into a new organism. This kind of reproduction in which male and female gametes fuse together is called sexual reproduction. Male reproductive organs. The male reproductive organs include a pair of testes, two sperm ducts and a penis. The testes produce the male gametes called sperms. Millions of sperms are produced by the testes. Those sperms are very small in size. Each has a head, a middle piece and a tail. Indeed, each sperm is a single cell with all the usual cell components. female reproductive organs. The female reproductive organs are a pair of ovaries, oviducts or fallopian tubes, and the uterus. Ovary produces female gametes called ova. In human beings, a single matured egg is released into the oviduct by one of the ovaries every month. Uterus is the part where development of the baby takes place. Like the sperm, an egg is also a single cell. Fertilization. The first step in the process of reproduction is the fusion of a sperm and an ovum. When sperms come in contact with an egg, one of the sperms may fuse with the egg. Such fusion of the egg and the sperm is called fertilization. The fertilized egg or zygote starts dividing and form a ball of cells or embryo. The embryo is implanted in the lining of the uterus where they continue to grow and develop organs to become fetus. The lining thickens and is richly supplied with blood to nourish the growing embryo in the uterus. The embryo gets nutrition from the mother's blood with the help of a special tissue called placenta. What happens when the egg is not fertilized? If the egg is not fertilized, it lives for about 1 day. Since the ovary releases one egg every month, the uterus also prepares itself every month to receive a fertilized egg. Thus, its lining becomes thick and spongy. This would be required for nourishing the embryo if fertilization had taken place. Now, however, this lining is not needed any longer. So, the lining slowly breaks and comes out through the vagina as blood and mucus. This cycle takes place roughly every month and is known as menstruation. It usually lasts for about 2 to 8 days. Reproductive health. Reproductive health means all the normal health conditions which help to lead a normal, safe and healthy reproductive life. Diseases can be transmitted from person to person in a variety of ways, and many diseases can be sexually transmitted. These include bacterial infections such as gonorrhea and syphilis, and viral infections such as warts and HIV/AIDS. Pregnancy will make major demands on the body and the mind of the woman. If she is not ready for it, her health will be adversely affected. Therefore, many ways have been devised to avoid pregnancy. These contraceptive methods are mechanical barriers like condoms, pills, copper T. Children, now let us recapitulate what you have learnt. Reproduction involves creation of a DNA copy and additional cellular apparatus by the cell involved in the process. Various organisms use different modes of reproduction depending on their body design. Reproduction is of two types: asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction. In fission, many bacteria and protozoa simply divide into two or more daughter cells. Organisms such as Hydra can regenerate if they are broken into pieces. They can also give out buds which mature into new individuals. Roots, stems and leaves of some plants develop into new plants through vegetative propagation. Reproduction in flowering plants involves transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma, which is referred to as pollination. This is followed by fertilization. If the pollen is transferred to the same flower, it is called self-pollination, but if the pollen is transferred to a different flower of same variety, it is called cross-pollination. Changes in the body at puberty, such as increase in breast size in girls and new facial hair growth in boys, are signs of sexual maturation. Contraception to avoid pregnancy can be achieved by the use of condoms, oral pills, copper tea, and other methods. Children, now I will ask you a few questions and I hope that you all must be knowing the answers. First of all, I will ask some fill in the blanks. My first question is, the special tissue present in the mother's body for the nourishment of the embryo is called? And the answer is placenta. My next question, after fertilization, the embryo in humans attaches with the wall of the dash. And the right answer is uterus. Name the hormone produced by male reproductive organ. And the hormone produced is testosterone. Next question, name the method of reproduction in amoeba. So, amoeba reproduces by the method of binary fission. My next question is, what is pollination? The transfer of pollen from one flower to the other is called pollination. My next question, name the reproductive parts of a flower. And the reproductive parts of flower are stamen and pistil. My next question, name the sexually transmitted diseases. Diseases can be transmitted sexually through bacteria and virus. The bacterial diseases are gonorrhea and syphilis, and the viral diseases are warts and HIV/AIDS. Children, with this we complete our chapter and I hope that you all must have listened to the chapter carefully and understood it well. Children, stay home, stay safe, keep learning and keep growing. Thank you.